Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and today we're going to talk about the importance of coming out of our comfort zones. To help us do that is Michelle Tennant Nicholson, MA. She's an award-winning author and international publicist. She has a master's degree in human development. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, so happy to be here.
So to start with what might seem like an obvious question, but perhaps isn't, what exactly do we mean when we use the term comfort zones?
Yeah, so I know for me, it's like when you know that you're moving out of your comfort zone when your heart gives like a little, pitter patter. You know when you're like on a risk, you're about to take a risk, and I'm not talking about just physical risk, like you go on whitewater rafting, but this might be. I need to muster up some courage to ask somebody out, or I need to get some courage to tell the truth about something. So these are all areas of comfort, discomfort, and growth happens in the discomfort zone.
I am totally fascinated with the idea of stepping out of our comfort zones because it seems to me there's no other way to grow if we just stay locked in a bubble. And for that reason, I like television shows. For instance, I used to watch Dancing with the Stars, and it probably seems silly to some people, but these celebrities were not trained dancers. So they would have to come out of their comfort zone and perform in front of an audience and put forth a lot of effort. And I thought that was incredible. Or the show Into the Wild with Bear Grylls. It was similar where celebrities would go with him on outdoor excursions. And it was so obvious that this was not what they were used to doing. It was just very admirable in my view. Now, there's very salient reasons why people don't want to come out of their comfort zones, not the least of which, of course, it's uncomfortable. But what are some of the psychological reasons that people are very hesitant or find it very difficult to do so?
Well, it mostly boils down to conditioning and who we are as people, right? So a lot of times you'll see somebody who's an extreme risk taker. In my 20s, I'm now in my 50s, but in my 20s, I was a professional whitewater raft guide on the weekends. During the week, I had a suit job, right? But the thing that most people, if you think back to school and you think back to the first time you were public speaking, typically people have a reaction one way or the other, right? They hate public speaking, and most people do. Or you're just a natural in front of a group and it doesn't bother you. Well, why is that? There is a movie called Free Solo. Have you seen it, Michael?
No, I haven't.
It's a really wonderful movie, especially if you like adventure sports like me. My husband and I were watching it, and the main character, we're going through his training on how he's going to free solo El Capitan, this like really dangerous and very, it's like the holy grail for rock climbers. So, but what they actually do is they show a functional MRI in his amygdala, and his fear center, either because he's trained it out of him or because he was born that way, who knows, right? Nature, nurture. And he doesn't have the same type of fear response that the rest of us do. Whether you are born naturally able to suppress fear and go further into that area of physical risk or not, one of the ways that you can train yourself is by conditioning yourself to be more uh, comfortable with that risk area, the area of risk. So, my mother's German, and she has a very thick accent still. And when I started to whitewater kayak and raft and whatnot, it drove her nuts, right? She was a very protective mother. And I remember she asked me in her German accent, Michelle, why do you do such dangerous things? And without skipping a beat, I said, you know what, Mom? I do dangerous things not to escape life, but to prevent life from escaping me. I had just read it in a book the night before, right? So I don't even remember what book I was reading. But she looked at me and she goes, but that's a good answer. I said, I know it's a good answer, right? So it wasn't until I really got into sports that caused the adrenaline to really raise the roof. As a child, I was picked last in I went to a parochial private school, and on the playground, I was always picked last at kickball, right? I wasn't really athletically skilled. My parents valued piano lessons over the sports, right? And then later I went to performing arts high school. So I was like hook, line, and sinker down the theater route. So by the time I got into my 20s, like really pursuing physical risk, mountain biking, whitewater kayaking. I used to do, because I'm so scared of heights, I used to do rock climbing and doing rappelling just to kind of play with that sense of risk and that fear response in my body. I would have that immediate adrenaline surge, and then I would actually practice dealing with that, right? Because I had started my master's degree studies. I had started to really like look into, well, what's actually happening in transformational education, what's actually happening for transformational growth. And studies show that when you're actually on that edge of risk, that edge of discomfort is what really grows you and has you have that confidence that I can do it, I can do this, and I can do that. And that's really how we start to condition ourselves from that, oh, I'm totally fearful and I can't go on, to let me go ahead and just try this and see what's possible. The trick is, um, like Michael Easter wrote in his book, The Discomfort Zone, or the Comfort Crisis. The Comfort Crisis. I'm thinking of another podcast, The Discomfort Zone, which is also a good podcast by a professional whitewater kayaker named Anna Levesque. But Michael Easter talks about in The Comfort Crisis how we've become too comfortable in today's society, right? We couch surf, most of us, right? From streaming service to streaming service. So we're in front of our technology more than we are outside. So that's why I think, when Easter talks about the comfort crisis, and he wrote a series of articles for Men's Health as the former contributor editor to Men's Health, that I think that really hits the nail on the head about, you know, if you're too comfortable, you become complacent. That also affects your self-esteem. That also affects your growth. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. It seems, well, it doesn't just seem, I know that the way to come out of the comfort zone, it's like the old Nike saying, just do it. Right. And I remember I must have been in my late 20s, maybe 28 or 29. And I became a group facilitator for a program called the Alternative to Violence Project. And I
Hmm.
was terrified of public speaking, but I did it and nothing horrible happened. And the more I did it, the more comfortable I got. When I was first asked to do an interview on a local radio show, after the interview, the host said to me, "Would you like to be a regular on the show?" And I said, "Of course." And then I thought, "Oh, I have nothing to talk about every week." But then I did it, and it became more and more comfortable to do so. And the rewards have been fantastic. But nothing, I don't think, well, I'm not going to say nothing, because changing myself and having to face my internal fears and inadequacies and all that's very difficult, but that's purely psychological risk. I want to talk a little bit about some physical risk, because
Okay.
I was incarcerated for a very long time, and my best friend and my cellmate, Brent McCall, he and I wrote a book criticizing the prison system.
Hmm.
And I knew going in, we were putting ourselves at serious physical risk, both from staff and other inmates.
Sure.
And is like the guy you talk about. Brent doesn't have a fear response.
Hmm.
He just doesn't, this is what we're going to do, and that's it. And if something bad comes of it, then it comes of it. I was terrified. But I did it because it was the right thing to do and because Brent was my friend. And in talking with Brent, Brent said to me, he said, "Michael, in many ways, you have more courage than I do, because I'm not afraid. You are, but you're doing it anyways,"
Hmm.
which is good and
Insightful.
important. But here's the thing, there was the risk of getting hurt, right? So now, fortunately, I didn't get hurt, but we could have gotten hurt. And when you come out of your comfort zone, or when you go too far past that edge, you do take that risk. And I guess, like, is there a hack or a heuristic that can help decide when to kind of put the brakes and not go too far beyond our comfort zones?
Yes, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your time being incarcerated. I think it's important to note that whether to first figure out if you have autonomy over your physical well-being. So when you're incarcerated, the society has taken away your autonomy, right? There's a lot that you don't have power over. So the safety risk of your physical well-being, I think that's a whole other conversation, because first and foremost, if you think about, there's one of the things I studied in my master's degree program, which a lot of people have talk about, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Uh, Essentially, you need the base layer of safety, right? Your physical needs met before you can self actualize into higher transformational realization. So, a lot of times people will say about children or things like that. I had in my, as a international publicist, I had an author who had written about children and parenting and so forth. And she was complaining. She's like, I don't really want to talk about my personal children because they're a little bit of a mess. I was like, what do you mean a little bit of a mess, right? I used to teach fifth grade. So tell me, what do you mean by a mess? Right. And so this child was just outgoing, gregarious, obstinate, a teenager, basically. And I said, did you ever consider that you were such a good parent that your child feels safe to be self-expressed, to really push the edge of the envelope of what society deems good behavior? And she just stopped cold and she goes, I never thought about it that way. I said, when your needs are met, that's when you can try these other things, right? So first and foremost, do you have enough food? Do you have enough water? Do you have the health that you need? These are the basic things that humans need before they can actually have these other conversations, right? So if you and I were on a desert, and didn't have enough water, the first thing that we would need is to get water no matter the risk. Okay? So those are baseline things, like when we, 100, 200 years ago, when our ancestors were looking for gold, they're in their little, horse and buggies looking for gold or whatever, water, whatever, firewood, whatever they needed to be in survival. That's not what we're talking about, because that's when we had inherent risk in our daily lives, right? Living was the risk, right? Today, we forget, right? We have plenty of time to complain. We have plenty of time to be self-expressed online and be that critic to somebody else, right? Judging other people. But there is a difference between being on the court and actually playing a basketball game, and those being in the bleachers judging and looking at those, right? So who are you? And if you are in the stands, maybe you want to think about getting on the court a little bit. So, how do you get on the court? Well, that's different for all of us, right? So, do you want to go back to school? Do you want to take some physical risk, like go mountain biking you never had before? Or just go to the gym and try a spin class, an indoor cycling class, or something like that. Uh, However, if you're uh, sick, or you're broke, or you've got other issues that are affecting your survival, those are the things to focus on first before going off and looking at this other area of risk. My husband, who I met whitewater kayaking, he's always said it, because I felt like you and your cellmate. I felt like I was always very scared. We call it white knuckle gripped in whitewater kayaking, right? Where you're just so scared, you're holding onto the paddle so hard that your knuckles go white. I just always felt like I was so scared and he wasn't. And I asked him, I said, what's the difference? Like, why are you not scared? He goes, well, first of all, I practice. I practice being scared in easier water. So he might go, there's a class system with whitewater. Class 2 might be easy with just some, a little bit of rapids, right? Where class 5, 6 is going to be very, very challenging, almost deadly. So he would go into class 2 water, class 3 water, and pretend he was in class 5 or 6 water so that he would get his body acclimated. Then he said, because he would do, I live in Western North Carolina. There is a river called the Green River. And then there's the section called the Narrows, which, is really class 5, class 6, very accomplished paddlers from around the world come here and do that. He's done it about 300 times. And I asked him, I said, what gives you the capacity to do that when other kayakers don't have the skill set and they might actually hurt themselves? How do you discern the difference? He goes, I think about risk assessment. He was also a loan officer, Michael. So he's thinking of risk assessment and the way that he does loan risk assessment, right? When he was giving loans to people. So he thinks about his skill level, his practice level, the level that he's been able to progress at the easier water. And then he actually asks himself, is his skill capacity, is it warranted? And can he rely on his skill capacity for this section of water, which not everybody does, right? I've seen people go too quickly into that harder water and then really hurt themselves. So I think the lesson here from his story is, are you practicing? Are you taking those baby steps on a daily basis before you go on that super big risk? And for all of us, it means something different. For some of us, it's getting out on stage. So then rather than being in front of thousands and millions of people like you were on the radio, maybe you just get up in church or the synagogue, wherever you worship. Maybe you're just doing like 30 people at a time versus 30,000 people at a time. If you're doing physical risk, then maybe doing something smaller and more easy so that the muscles get memory into what you're doing. Not only your biceps and your legs and so forth, but people forget about their cortisol uptick, right? Because when you're nervous, your cortisol rushes, you have the adrenaline that rushes, and then you have to, your body has to recover from that and actually has to process the adrenaline out of the body. So this gentleman that I talked about in Free Solo, that movie really goes into his training process about, how he does that on a regular basis. For those of us who aren't doing El Capitan, right? Maybe you're going to the gym and it's the same thing, like you're doing a heavy set of weights on Tuesday. And then by Thursday, you can't walk because you've trained too hard, right? Because you've got delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS. And then you have to drink some water. You have to sleep a little longer. You have to maybe take some supplements or eat some nutrition to help your body really process that the the byproduct of that extra effort that your body has put through. And that's the piece that people forget, the recovery piece. So go rappelling, go zip lining and get that adrenaline going as you start to build your ability to be with risk. But don't forget to sleep. Don't forget to drink your water. Don't forget to, eat a good meal so that your body knows it's safe. See, if it doesn't know that it's safe, then it can't progress on in this level of risk taking that is necessary for growth,
There's so much there that I want to get into.
Okay, good.
So, okay, in Democracy in America, de Tocqueville talks about how Americans, he says, are insatiable. We're never content.
Hmm.
And
True.
I think that probably applies to everybody, and I don't really see a problem with it because I think discontentment leads to growth. As long as the discontent is not so extreme that it's crippling or it's causing malfunctions in my life. But in the further reaches of human nature, Maslow talks about exactly why that's the case. Because, like you said, you have this hierarchy of needs. So once you meet one level of needs, there's always more needs. And the need for growth is always going to be there. We
Yeah.
always need to grow, to keep going, to keep moving forward. And the only way to do that is if we step out of those comfort zones. And in my own personal growth, I had an awful lot to change. I mean, I was a career criminal, so and I had massive amounts of insecurities, poor self-esteem, all types of issues that I had to
Mm.
confront. And the only way to do that was by facing things squarely, not denying that I had a weakness, that I had abandonment fears, whatever the case was, my cowardice. I had to deal with that, face it, and grow. But that's painful. I can speak from experience. And I remember I had this book called The Psychology of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden, and I let Brent read it after I got it. And Brent got mad at me when he was reading the book because it touched on so many of those nerves that are at that comfort zone or right beyond it that people don't want to deal with. But I trained myself, and Brent trained himself to do that. And by doing that, I'm able to continue to grow. A problem, though, that this has, I don't want to say caused, but led to in my life is I'm a reality junkie. I don't traffic in bullshit. I have no desire to engage in fantasy, to have conversations that are just surface level where one person's pretending to be another. But I'm quick to call other people on bullshit when I'm talking to them. And the problem is not everybody's just ready to step outside the comfort zone. And I need to, I think, learn to be more patient with where other people are
Mm.
in their journey. So if you're advising somebody on how to come out of their comfort zone, how do you keep the sort of the balance between pushing somebody but not making them so uncomfortable that it actually has the reverse effect and just causes them kind of to pull back into the shell?
Mm. Really rich question. Okay. Permission. Most of us, when we're having conversations with others, don't have permission to go there, right? So you have to remember that when you're conversing with somebody, um, by and large, most people are thinking about themselves, right? They're not thinking about what you're actually saying. Let me repeat that. You're not listening to what I'm actually saying. You're listening to that voice in your head that is a judgment about what Michael and I are saying. You are not actually listening to the words that I am saying, right? So, first of all, if you drink that in, that is a huge realization. I first made that realization at a personal development seminar I took when I was 24 called the Landmark Forum. It changed my life. It was 3 days and an evening. So impactful. Of course, I did all the therapy. I did all the everything. Let me just address what I just said, right? So there's a difference between therapy and coaching. Therapy is really dealing with your demons from the past. And Michael, you talk about being a career criminal and the transformation that happened. I was a child who was attacked by a neighborhood pedophile from the ages
Oof.
of 8 to 18. I put him in jail when I was 18. And so I had to overcome complex PTSD through a lifetime. And look, the conditioning is there, right? The conditioning that in our childhood, one, it took you on a trajectory of being a criminal. My trajectory was healing the body from complex PTSD. The pathways are actually similar, right? Because you're still taking that conditioning that you have that's given to you by your family and your society. And boy, I'm an entrepreneur. I love capitalism. I am not going to talk smack about America at all. However, I think that part of being successful is learning what's enough. I've been teaching indoor cycling classes for 12 years, and students don't know what's enough. They think that bringing their heart rate up is going to be the best thing. They haven't been doing it. They haven't done an exercise class in maybe 20 years. And then they come to an indoor cycling class and they try to do that maximum effort, because what do you hear on the advertising, right? You got to go hard. You got to go. If you don't go big, go home, right? No pain, no gain. Like, that's our society. The funny thing is about that is that when, you know, students go too hard, they're actually burning sugar, carbohydrates in their body, not fat. Most people who go to a spin class or a Peloton class or a Soul Cycle, there's so many different variations of what Johnny G originally taught us back in the 70s and 80s. But ironically, you burn more. You get actually, when you get the slower you go, a lot of elite athletes will go slower so they can go faster. They do aerobic base training for 6 weeks out of their whole year. And it's interesting, like recovery and going slow. How can that actually get you to the next level? So when we mask that back onto what we're talking about with risk and taking little baby steps and not getting into somebody else's business that you don't have permission. See, part of us, when we're trying to um, give free advice to other people because you see them struggling, the best way to deal with that is to ask them a question. And most of us will not ask a question. We'll state, you got a problem, you got to change, especially if it's a lover, right? Why do you do it that way? Why do you pick your nose that way? I don't like that. You got to change, right? And then the lover's like, I'm not, you don't accept me? I'm not okay. I'm not safe is what they hear. I'm not safe to be who I am. And change cannot happen, right? If we go back to Maslow, if you're not feeling safe in a relationship, in your body, in society, it's gonna come out sideways, right? I'm gonna have complex PTSD. Michael, you're gonna do your crimes and end up incarcerated like you did, right? It's just that's just like what's so about humanity, right? So asking questions. So on that note, Michael, what value did you get out of what I just said? See, that's a great question to ask somebody. I don't have to tell Michael. I don't have to tell you what to do. I can just say, what did you hear me say?
Well, it's very interesting because I asked a psychologist that I had on the show recently a very similar question, and she gave me the same exact answer, that
Oh,
you need to
interesting.
ask people permission to pry into their lives. And now I have what might be a sort of a savior complex, and it, it's not difficult for me to assess why. My parents were both drug addicts.
Hmm.
And so my whole life, I feared my mother was going to die, and she ultimately committed suicide.
No,
I
I'm so
couldn't
sorry.
save my mother from her addiction.
Sure.
So I tend to try to rescue or save or change other people.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult tightrope to walk, because I recognize that it's not my place to change other people. However, it is my place to decide whom I wish to be around or the type of people I wish to associate with. And I don't just exist as a sounding board for other people's bullshit, right? So if
That's
somebody
right.
comes to me and talks to me about their issues, or they want to be in a friendship with me, or even a professional relationship, whatever it might be, I'm not just here to listen to you feed me nonsense. So I feel, have the right to respond, but it's sort of, I guess, striking the balance and not going over into savior mode where I'm going beyond the scope of what that person has brought to me.
Hmm.
So it's something that I need to learn, and this is part of the Maslow's thing, is that we're constantly growing, and it doesn't matter. I could grow, take 1,000 steps in one area of my life, but then there's other areas that need to be addressed as well. And that's a lifelong process. And I think it's something that needs to be embraced through, again, coming out of our comfort zone and doing it. But the interpersonal stuff for me is maybe the most difficult because of my complex history of relationships, my upbringing, friendships, romantic relationships. So I'm still learning to get that balance. But I think you're absolutely right that it's not up to anybody to just lunge into somebody else's life and start prying and telling them what's wrong with them and what they need to do to change. But I do think there is a space for that type of conversation if you're in intimate relationships with someone and
Mm,
that person's behavior is affecting you or they're bringing their problems to you.
mm. It's so rich, Michael. I too, mine, I call mine the helper complex with a capital H. And the helper complex. What I think you come back, tragedy strikes, like you losing your mother at a young age and going through, being the child of parents who are addicted. All of these things really impact who you become. And you do want to, at the end of the day, all of us want to matter. We just just all last night we watched Deadpool Wolverine. I didn't think it was as good as it was rated, but it was funny in places. But Deadpool just wants to matter. That's the bottom line, right? And Wolverine just wants to matter. And we all just want to make a difference for another human being. The difference that we're out to make, that impact, can change from person to person. And you know, a lot of times people just want to be heard. Can you close your mouth and just ask them, how do you want me to listen to you right now, as a friend, as a coach, as your partner? Do you maybe I just need to listen to you and not say anything at all? I had a friend I was out to lunch with, and she was building a business. And, she and I had known each other from, we had done Brazilian Jiu Jitsu together. And I highly recommend if people have been physically assaulted, I highly recommend Jiu Jitsu. That'll get you out of your comfort zone. You're rolling around with people. Um, But we were out to lunch and she said, she was talking about her new business and I put my publicist hat on. I couldn't help myself. I was like, you could do this, you could do that, like I just start creating. And she looked straight at me and she goes, "Can you just be my friend? I just need you to be my friend. I know how to market. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for Michelle to just be in lunch with me and not just take your PR hat off." That was a good friend, right? That was somebody who knew her boundaries and what worked for her. But most of us go around and we're not that clear. And back to, I laugh about your sharing this morning, Michael, because I will find myself bored in conversations. Do you ever do that?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Somebody's like just complaining. And one time I was so straight with a person. I said, I was driving. I said, "I'm just gonna drive you home because I just really, this conversation, you keep saying the same thing over and over again. And it's like 45 minutes of your complaining on the same thing. And it's like, I just don't want to listen to it anymore." She started to cry, of course. Can you imagine? I was like way too brutal. That was my military dad. My dad was a military sergeant. And he talked that way. So I had no, I did a few years of nonviolent communication with the hopes of curing whatever my military sergeant dad left in me. But she started to cry. And then was like, okay, Michelle, you got to muster up some empathy real quick. Right. Because you're an asshole. Like I was like straight up an asshole. Right. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did this. So I held her hand, because she was in the passenger seat. And I said, how about we just pull over? Because we were going on to a coffee shop. I said, but we just pull over and how about I just listen to you? And she's like, thank you. That's all she needed is, the reason why she kept 45 minutes with the same complaint, because I wasn't hearing it. See, when you hear it and you really get it, sometimes it disappears it. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you just need new friends. I just wrote an article, which is how we met, right, Michael? At Psychology Today, I wrote an article called, "Stepping Out of Your your comfort zone, but for the new year. And I use the analogy of a noun, people, places, and things, as a way to, and by the way, if you want to read it, I've got a short URL, writethetrauma.org, as in write, WRITE, thetrauma.org. And you'll go right to the page where I contribute there. But what we do is we look at in the new year, when you're creating your future, therapy is about the past, coaching, life coaching, seminars, things of that nature. It's about fast tracking you on your future, what you're creating for the future, right? Therapy, we're dealing with past trauma, conditioning that we can't control. We're just trying to make sense of it. But coaching, right, is like a sports coach or a business coach. We're looking at a future we want to create, and then we're having somebody hold our hand as we get to that goal. So, people, places, things. What type of people are you hanging around? And sometimes the people that you're hanging around are bringing you down. Find people who lift up your creation, right? Places, there you've got two tongues and one lies. The one in your mouth lies. Even though you and I are straight talkers, Michael, we can agree that the nature of humanity is we lie. But the tongue in your shoe never lies. Wherever you are, that's where you really want to be. Even if you're like, no, I don't. Yeah. Even if it's jail, right? You made choices to put yourself there, right? You're there, right? I'm not talking about people who are wrongly incarcerated. That's a whole other conversation, right? Um, but think about where you are naturally and where you are. It's like the movie It's a Wonderful Life, right? He ends up being in the same community, right? Because people need him and he's making a difference with those people. And ultimately he accepts that that's where he wants to be. The last thing is things. And Maya Angelou once said, or no, it was Toni Morrison who said, sometimes, to fly, to soar, you need to lighten your load, right? You need to lighten the things that weigh you down. So, what's weighing you down? What things? And only surround yourself with the things that actually create the future you want to create. Does your smartphone, is it actually like supporting you, or is it a distraction taking you away from your goals? If you want to write a book and you're scrolling 24/7, that book ain't going to get written, stuff like that. Or maybe you need a new type of calendaring system or reminder system or something that, because once we create something, the nature of humanity is just to forget. I might see Michael a year from now and he's like, oh, remember when you were on my podcast and you said you were going to create XYZ, right? We're going to do van life next year. My husband and I, we're going to get in our Sprinter van and travel cross country, right? So when I see you the next time, you should ask me about that. And then I go, oh, I completely forgot, unless it's in existence in my things, so that it actually moves that forward. So people, places, things. And I really invite everybody. The first one is really people.
One of the things that I picked up from the two conversations that you talked about having, where the one where your friend told you she just needed you to be a friend, and the other one where you told the woman that you were going to take her home, it's one of the comfort zones that I had to train myself to come out of, and I think most people can benefit from doing so, is in being assertive and recognizing that as human beings we have the right to tell other people what we think, what we need, what we want. And it's so hard to do, to come out of that comfort zone when you're not used to it. But to suppress things just ends up building resentments. I
That's
always
right.
tell people, listen, if you've got an issue with me, please tell me, because otherwise you're just going to end up resenting me, and I don't want that. So in the I found it interesting in the scenario where your friend tells you, I just need you to be a friend, after you were assertive with her, she was assertive
Yeah, I was
back.
giving her free advice that I get paid
Right.
for.
But she did the same thing, and that's okay, is she was assertive with you with what she needed.
Yes.
And in the scenario with the woman crying, is hard. Now, I wasn't there, I don't know how harsh you were in your tone and all that, but I still do think that I have a right to tell people, stop bringing your stuff to me. if you're just complaining to me, I have the right to say, listen, if we're not going to look for solutions, then I'm not interested in this. That's my right to assert that, to speak what I think. And if I don't, if I'm just sitting there listening to the complaining, there's a difference if I'm listening and I'm being genuinely empathic, where I'm actually concerned with the person and listen. But if I'm just listening out of politeness, then I'm going to end up resenting this person and just becoming angry. So I think that it's imperative to I think almost anybody can benefit from being more assertive. Of course, there's exceptions, but in general, I think we can. And I'm just curious, in your experience in dealing with this issue of comfort zones, is that a comfort zone that a lot of people have a difficult time coming out of, in being assertive and letting other people know what they think and feel?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote a recent article in September. So the time of our recording is December 2024. Sorry to timestamp you,
It's
Michael.
okay.
In September of 2024, I wrote a series of articles because I was dealing with a nonprofit. Well, it was a little nonprofit that I was volunteering with, and there was a lot of gossip. And I think that what you're pointing to is that when people are uncomfortable about having a straight conversation, and maybe they've interpreted an email or some type of situation or somebody's leadership, they've interpreted it in a way where they think it's not positive. We can see this play out on our national and international scale as well. But let's just talk about it in a local community. Rather than having a straight communication saying, hey, Michael, I got this email. It really disempowered me. What did you mean by that? They won't do that. They'll go gossip. Can you believe she sent that email? She should not be in a leadership role at all. She's crazy, or whatever it is, right? I think that it points to the person and their ability to have boundaries, communicate their needs, really be in touch with their desires and their wants and their needs. And then it reflects in all relationships, not just casual relationships in a volunteer position, but also in intimate relationships, like, with a long-term partner, as a lover, or a business partner, or a friendship, right? These friendships that we cherish through the lifetime, like your relationship with Brent, like these are, and, it's an interesting, I love the story about him getting mad about the book, right? Because it was pointing to an area. We forget that our anger is really something that is telling us we need something. So, especially, men and women we've been socialized to process anger differently, right? Men get physical, women pull it in on themselves. That's why you might find the stereotypical roles of women, crying, and, like that scenario I told you about, where men might be just like, "Hey, this conversation is over, dude. You just need to man up and then move on," right? My husband likes to say when we fight, um, "This conversation is over," and leave the room. that doesn't that doesn't quite work. However, um, through the course of our marriage, and we've been married for 20 years, I've adopted that behavior because it's actually a good boundary. When you start to kind of get in a cycle that is unproductive, maybe you just need a breather. Maybe you just need a time out to kind of think about something. So now we kind of laugh about it, and I'll say, this conversation's over. And then we start to laugh, which then lightens the mood or whatever, and then we're able to really bring about our rational, because your brain is you've got your rational part of the brain, and you also have your primal part of the brain. Again, it goes back to feeling safe or not. And when you're in a conversation with somebody you don't feel safe, you start to get angry, you start to feel like, oh my God, this person is like complaining nonstop, and I don't want this. I don't want this today, right? That's a fear center that you need to manage. And we do it differently, right? Like, I got curt and pretty aggressive with my friend. Thank God she's still a friend today. if you're listening to this podcast and you recognize who you are, I love you. I'm not going to say any names because a few of my friends might be like, was that me? Like, but the point is that, yeah, part of being a good friend is communicating what you need. And we're very poor at that, Michael. I think that we can tell that we're poor at that by looking at comments on social media. I shared, this was just so funny. It was over Thanksgiving holiday. I shared, because we're doing the van life thing. And I was like, we're in the van. It's new for us. Here's what we're having for breakfast. It was like scrambled eggs and some sausage. It was delicious. It was so delicious. And one of my comments, and remember, if you don't have any haters are okay. They're just like reflecting themselves. And he wrote, "This looks like poop." And then I said, of course, you got to have humor with that because you're like, that poor guy, right? He's in a holiday looking at a couple's meal on social media and has that type. Can you imagine how sad his life is? Right? This looks like poop. So I was like, well, how can I bring a little joy to this guy's life? Right. And I just replied and I said, well, the poop was delicious and the food will definitely become poop in a few hours, something like that, And my husband just thought that was hilarious. But again, though, recognizing that somebody else's reaction, somebody else's complaint, comment is just a reflection of what's happening internally for them and you get to choose whether you want to interact with that or not. You get to choose. You always have choice. You can always be like my husband and say, this conversation is over, you know? So
I think that's awesome. It's probably a good place to stop, unless you think there's something we didn't touch on that we
the
should touch on.
conversation is over, Michael.
Conversation is over. Where can people find you?
Okay, so they can go to the best place. My personal one is michelletennant.com. So 2 L's in Michelle. Of course, I write at Psychology Today. Every month I have something new. I focus on mental injury is not mental illness. So when you have experienced, I would assert that, having had the childhood that you did too, you probably had, some issues with complex PTSD too, Michael. I don't want to, overstep a boundary. But if you've had Michael's background or my background and you're struggling with that and you're needing some type of focus, please let me know and I would be happy to write some articles or get you the help that you need. So michelletennant.com.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here this morning.
My pleasure.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Leibowitz, and remember, share your comments, please. It helps. Till next time.